Well, g'day and welcome to the channel. Over the last 14 years, I've made a lot of mistakes in the field, which have ended up costing me a bit of money and taken unnecessary risks. In today's video, I want to share with you some cautionary tales from myself and my beautiful subscribers and members to help you understand what not to do in the field and hopefully prevent you from going through these experiences. All right, so the first story is from my member Matt, and he was out photographing some owls and he was borrowing his friend's 200 to 800, and they're having a wonderful time. They've got lots of photos, and Matt has loosened off the lens foot to take the camera and the lens off the tripod head. They've then been swarmed by mosquitoes. They've stepped away. Unfortunately, it wasn't balanced properly and the camera has fallen, the lens has fallen straight onto the concrete, damaging the lens, damaging the camera. I can only imagine how Matt felt in that scenario. Subscriber Hisham had a similar experience when his Sony A1 and 200 to 600 went flying off his tripod onto the concrete. He was trying to film a stout and moved his tripod, but unfortunately had not secured the lens foot properly, and in his words, he felt his soul leaving his body as he watched the camera and lens fall to the ground, ending in a very costly repair and one he hopes others can learn from. With these Arca Swiss, you can sometimes not lock them in properly, so I'm extremely paranoid about making sure it slots in and then doing it up as tight as you can, and I just double check and double check. So the other thing with tripods, which happened to me, is that if you don't balance it properly, it can damage the camera. What do I mean? So at the moment, when I loosen it off, it's balanced, it's not going anywhere. But if I extend this lens and I let it go, I'm getting nervous just doing it. It just falls forward, which they can make your tripod fall over. The other thing is if you don't have it balanced the other way. I had a scenario where I was in the water, my camera was just above the water here, I've let go and it wasn't balanced properly and it's just fallen back like this and the camera fell into the water. And I was just so upset when that happened. It was my fault. And then the next issue with tripods is they actually act like big sails. If there's any wind around, it can cause these tripods to fall over. And I got countless stories of people's tripods falling over. So they are pretty sturdy, but you get a bit of wind and away they go. So subscriber Adrian shared this exact scenario. He was on his first day of a workshop, so it is 5D4, his 16 to 35, on his tripod to capture some seascapes. He stepped away for a couple of seconds, a gust of wind's gone. He's watched in slow motion as his tripod's fallen over. The camera and lens has hit the ground, damaging them. Unfortunately, the lens was broken. I think he was still able to use the camera, but that trip was very difficult without that lens. And another scenario was my mate Jan went out with his mate and he had his 500 f4 on a tripod. Again, the wind's blowing, it's fallen over, and that lens has ended up snapping in half. So as you can see, the risks are real. What can you do to overcome that? Just make sure it's extremely sturdy, make sure your legs are locked, make sure the lens is balanced. Some tripods will allow you to hang something underneath. This one doesn't, but sometimes you can put a bag or something just to make it sturdy, but just be double sure. The last thing you want is your tripod falling over. The last thing I want to mention is, let me know in the comments if this has happened to you. I have almost or partially crushed my fingers when I've been picking up tripods and it's fallen against my hand. Some tripods have these very sharp edges, so just be careful where you put your fingers when you're picking up your tripods, because if you've got a fair bit of weight on it, it can cause the legs to crush in on your fingers. So just be very careful of that. That brings me on to the next story, and it's actually quite embarrassing. So what happened is I was out in the middle of the bush with a couple of mates and there were no toilets anywhere. You can see where this is going. So we're out in the bush, we're having a wonderful time, I've got my camera, and then I get that sudden urge. I'm thinking, oh, I need to go to the toilet. What am I going to do? So I said to my mate, oh, my battery's run out on my camera, and I've asked for his keys to his car, just hoping that there would be something to assist me there. So I have penguin walked all the way to this car. It was a couple of kilometers away. I was almost sweating with anticipation. I had this emergency evacuation situation going on, and I have opened the back of his car, and to my relief, he had a roll of toilet paper and a shovel. Clearly this has happened to him, and he had taken the precautions, and I was so happy, I was so relieved, and obviously I dug a hole and disposed of it. But the story is, if he didn't have that toilet paper and that shovel, I don't know what I would have done. And my advice to you is, if you ever go anywhere in the bush, make sure you've got toilet paper and a shovel to deal with that situation. You don't want to be caught out with your pants down. So the next story I can definitely relate to. Member Graham said he was in Zion National Park in Nevada. He put his 100 to 500 Canon lens in his backpack. He put his 24-70 onto his camera. He's taken some photos. He's happy with that. He said he was going to keep his 24-70 on. And unfortunately for Graham, what happened is he forgot to zip up his backpack. So his zips were down. He's thrown it over his back. And as he started walking, his 100 to 500 has fallen out the back of his backpack, straight onto the concrete, damaging the lens. It cost him $1,600 to have that lens repaired. And it is just heartbreaking. I'm sorry that happened, Graham. But I've done this a couple of times, to be honest, where I've just failed to pull up the zips and then things have just fallen out of my bag onto the ground. Thankfully, I haven't experienced that sort of damage, but I'm definitely aware of it. And so I'm trying to ensure that I'm always zipping up my bag before I throw it over my back. And it's a really good tip and one that you should do. So the next two stories are very important and they could have ended very differently. The first one from Curtis. He was visiting Glue Pot, which is this amazing park in Australia. It's absolutely huge. It's out in the Mallee. It's very dry, very hot. Not a lot of people, a lot of roads going to nowhere. And he's decided to venture out to one of the furthest edges of this park, chasing some birds. And when he hopped out of his vehicle, he didn't realize, but he knocked the indicator, which turned his headlights on. He's gone birding, he's come back to his truck, he's jumped in, he's tried to start it, flat battery. He's in the middle of nowhere, no cell reception, no way to ask for help, miles and kilometers from the nearest hut or ranger or help. And he's sitting there panicking, thinking, what am I going to do? He's probably going to have to walk and just keep walking. Hopefully he had some water with him and try and get some help. Thankfully for him, he's obviously a little bit of a MacGyver, but he had a torch with a large battery in it. He had some wire and he's managed to hotwire the car and get it started. And he managed to get out of that situation. And he said at the bottom of his message, now I have a Garmin GPS, so I know where I am, and ability to SOS for help. He's got jumper leads and a jumper pack, so if his vehicle ever runs into trouble, he'll have a way of getting out of it. The next person who had a similar story was Charlie. Charlie messaged me to say in 2021, in the middle of winter, he's traveled into the Rockies in the US to get some beautiful photos. And as he's traveling up the Rockies, he noticed his vehicle's temperature gauge started to climb and climb and climb because the car was about to break down. He's managed to get to the top of the Rockies. It's minus 17 degrees Celsius. So if he stayed there, he'd probably freeze to death. And lucky for him, he's actually managed to get to the top. He's coasted down the other side and there was a gas station. I'm sure he was so relieved when he came to a gas station, he was able to call his father for help to come out and rescue him. But again, that story could have ended very differently. And another reason we have to make sure that we have the ability to contact people. We need some sort of SOS. The new iPhones have the ability, but make sure you've got a charger, make sure you've got battery backups, jumper packs, jumper leads. Don't go out into the middle of nowhere with no way to get out of that situation. So whilst tripods is probably one of the highest risks, the other extremely high risk is water. Water has the ability to completely destroy our gear, ruin our day, and even pose a massive risk to us. So the next story I'll share with you is by member Robert. I'm sure he was very scared when this happened to him, but he was out in Vancouver. He's wandering around the foreshore. He's looking to photograph some raptors. He's got all his gear with him. He's wandering around and he didn't notice, but there was some seaweed or some vegetation that it was actually covering a tidal pool. He didn't realize the tidal pool was there and he's walked straight into it and he's sunk straight down to this tidal pool, up to his neck in this very cold water. But the biggest risk was him actually drowning. He said he's managed to scramble out of the tidal pool. He's got out. Obviously his gear was all damaged, but he was safe. But he said the scary thing was he hadn't let anyone know where he was going. Nobody knew where he was. He was on his own. And if he got stuck in that tidal pool or got into trouble, nobody would have known where to go. So he learned a massive lesson that day that he needs to let people know where he's going and to be very careful when you're walking. One member suggested that what they do if they go into any areas like that is they have a monopod with them. They just use the monopod to sort of push down to see the depth of the water or the mud or whatever it is wherever they're walking, just to give them some stability. So that's not a bad idea. Fellow YouTuber John, he said he was at Cape Cod with his R5. He's taking some seascapes type images and a rogue wave has come in. It's hit his gear. He said he's grabbed the camera, the lens, he's put it into rice. Thankfully the camera, the R5 survived, but his lens died. Thankfully for John, he had purchased a drop and spill policy, so he was able to replace the lens. But again, water is just such a big risk. So I hate to admit, but I have lost a few cameras myself. And I have shared the story before, but I'll share it now because it's very important and I don't want anyone to experience this. But I had the great idea that I would go out into a lake with some waders on to photograph some ducks. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So I had these waders, I've got a tripod, I've got a gimbal, I've got my 500 f4, I've got my 5D4, and I am wading out into this lake, and the water's getting higher and higher. I think it was around waist height I'm in this water, but I didn't realize that at a point in the lake there were a lot of rocks, and these rocks were very, very slippery. And so what's happened is I've stood on this rock and I've fallen backwards, and as I've fallen backwards, my waders have gone under the water and the water's gone in my waders, so I'm getting dragged down, and I'm madly trying to keep the camera like this to keep the lens out of the water, but the camera's gone straight into the water and I am just floundering around trying to keep my gear above the water, trying not to drown, just pulling myself towards the edge. And it was just a horrible experience. I thought I was going to drown. I was worried about my gear. I've got out of the water. As soon as I get out of the water, the camera just starts taking photos on its own. It was like it was possessed. It was just, the shutter was just going brrr, and then all of a sudden the shutter just died. The camera died, and oh, it was just, it was a horrible experience. And that was a very important lesson for me to learn, that you just have to be so careful when you're wearing waders or going into the ocean or doing anything with water. I've had a number of people email me to say when they've attached their camera to their lens, they've thought it was attached and then they've moved off and the lens has just fallen straight from the camera body. You need to hear that click noise to know that the camera is actually attached to the lens. Sometimes you can knock it, but just be very careful when you're attaching lenses to cameras that it's locked into place and that it's not going to fall, because it's a horrible feeling to see a lens drop from your camera. Now, I also got a few stories which can be very hard to prevent, but we can take some precautions, and that's just being very mindful of the footwear that we use and where we're walking, and just making sure that we don't trip on anything or fall over, because the consequences can be a lot of damage to you and a lot of damage to your gear. Remember, Warren was hiking in the Blue Mountains, a beautiful area in Australia. So as he was hiking, he had some shoes on that didn't have any ankle support, and he's actually lost his footing, and he's actually ended up breaking his ankle at the bottom of a waterfall. I can only imagine how painful that was and how stressful it was, and to get out of that situation with a broken ankle. He said now he always wears appropriate footwear with lots of support in the ankle. And I'm sorry that happened, Warren, and I'm glad that you are okay, but it's definitely a reminder to us to always wear the appropriate footwear. And another member, Salmo, said he was out photographing with his 100 to 500, and he usually carries it on his holster, on his hip, and he's walking. It's obviously there's snow, and he's gone through the snow. There's some black ice. He slipped on the black ice, and he's actually come down onto a rock, but his camera was between the rock and himself. He's ended up crushing the lens and damaging the lens. Obviously, it would have been extremely painful on his hip, but it's just something that I think many of us have experienced. So subscriber Peter was actually looking at his camera and changing settings as he was walking. He didn't realize a bit of broken concrete. He's hit the concrete and he's face planted. He said thankfully his OM5 took the hit without any real damage, thankfully for that. It's very difficult to stop this sort of thing from happening, but we just need to be aware of our surroundings, I guess, and be mindful of where we're putting our feet to prevent us from falling over and damaging ourselves or our gear. So one thing we all need to make sure we have is appropriate insurance for both damage when we drop things or fall over, and also for theft. It's horrible when things get stolen, but it definitely happens, and I've got a couple of stories here. So remember, Matt said the most negative thing that's happened to him whilst doing photography is having gear stolen. He's coming back to his car and he's noticed somebody's broken in and stolen his gear. It just breaks your heart when that sort of thing happens. And I know fellow YouTuber Wild Alaska, he had all of his gear, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of gear stolen. He's got some videos on that you can watch. He shares his story. But I think the key there is to not leave really expensive gear in your vehicle if you're staying in accommodation or if you're going somewhere. Only take the gear you need, or take it with you. You just never know where you are or what people are likely to do. And sometimes there's nothing you can do. Like my mate Jan, he was photographing some beautiful parrots. He didn't have any gear in his vehicle, but they wanted to steal his winch. So they damaged the whole front of his truck. Not a lot you can do there. I mean, maybe you can think about high risk areas, but you can never plan for someone stealing your winch or your wheels or anything like that. It's just one of the reasons we have insurance. The next bit of advice I've got for you, and I think I've shared this before, is if you are traveling, it's really important to take a camera and a lens with you because you never quite know what's going to happen. So remember Tony, he said he was out with his wife. They went to a wetland and he didn't take his camera and lens with him. And he saw a white-bellied seagull come down and catch a fish right in front of him. And he said if he'd had his camera with him, he probably would have captured some of his best shots ever of this species. And it's just a reminder that if you've got a light kit, that's why I carry my zoom lens with me. Whenever I'm traveling, I put my camera and my lens on the passenger seat, and so I've always got it ready to go. The problem with that is years ago, I was driving around, camera and lens next to me, a kangaroo has jumped out, I've hit the brakes, and the camera and lens have just gone flying straight into the dashboard. Thankfully, it only damaged the lens hood and scratched it and damaged it, but it could have done a lot more damage. And since then, I always put a seatbelt on my gear. So click it in. I just put the camera and lens, and then I just put it around the lens foot, click it into place. So if I do hit the brakes, the camera's not going flying off the seat. So that's definitely something I would do. So the next thing to be aware of is some people will have a camera strap around their camera, around their neck. And I've got a good mate that goes on a lot of pelagics, and that's what he does. He just has the camera here, strap, and pulls it up. Unbeknown to him, over the years, the strap has worked itself loose, and he's out in the ocean, he's got his camera and his lens, and the strap has come loose, it's flying around, the camera and the lens have dropped, hit the side of the boat, off the boat, into the water, and he's watched it sink, sink, sink. All the photos gone, memory card, camera, lens, bottom of the ocean. So be very careful when you're using these straps to ensure that that they're done up tight and that they're not going to come loose. And the last bit of advice that I'll end this video on is just be conscious of wildlife itself. Be conscious of snakes, crocodiles, monkeys, lions, all those things. Don't take unnecessary risks because it can end very, very badly. And sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. We just need to be aware and alert. And subscriber Fabio said him and his partner went to Africa. They've got to their accommodation, and out of nowhere, a vervet monkey, female, has become extremely aggressive. Obviously, there's a young one nearby, and they didn't do anything to this monkey, but it's bared its teeth. He thought it was going to attack him and bite him. He's held his ground, and thankfully this monkey has backed off. But he said it was a pretty scary experience to go through, and something that I personally wouldn't want to happen. So that brings these stories to an end. Let me know in the comments your stories. What's happened to you? What bit of advice can you offer to others? We've got a beautiful community, so jump down in the comments, let people know what to look out for. I think the takeaway for me is we need appropriate insurance. So if something goes wrong, we have an ability to recoup at least some of the loss. We need to have some way to contact help. We need to let people know where we're going, jumper leads in the car, be mindful of tripods, be mindful of the water, all the things that I've mentioned today. Well, if you enjoyed this video, obviously give it that thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. So the next one, happy birding, take care, see you later.